welcome back to this explainer. Today we're diving into something that is, honestly, incredibly alarming. We're going to unpack exactly how an experimental military drill collided with a routine civilian medical flight. It literally turned our shared airspace into a deadly hazard. It's one of those stories that forces us to look really closely at the invisible infrastructure in our skies. And, well, what happens when it just suddenly vanishes? So this brings us to a chilling question to kick things off. How did an electronic warfare exercise running right here in domestic airspace lead to 4 civilian crew members becoming collateral damage? Did a GPS jamming drill essentially set a civilian medevac up to fail? To figure this out, we need to trace the exact events of a tragic night in New Mexico last May, step by step. All right, Section 1, a routine flight turns fatal, the King Air medevac tragedy. Let's look closely at how a medical evacuation flight, a mission literally designed to save lives, escalated into a total crisis. So the medevac, a King Air aircraft, departs from Roswell, New Mexico, heading toward Ruidoso. At first, everything is completely normal, but mid-flight, GPS disruptions are reported. Suddenly, the crew is forced off their familiar satellite guidance. And as they begin their approach, the whole situation just deteriorates. Air traffic control gets completely overwhelmed, and crucial weather data at their destination starts to lag because of these disruptions. Ultimately, blinded and totally disoriented in low visibility, the aircraft tragically impacts the rising mountainous terrain of the Captain Ridge mountain line. And the human cost here? It's absolutely devastating. All four people on board were killed. Their aircraft had been completely stripped of its navigation capabilities at the exact moment they needed them the most. They slammed into the mountain, leaving regulators and investigators just scrambling to figure out why a modern aircraft systems failed so totally in domestic sky. Moving to Section 2, uncovering the GPS blackout and the White Sands Missile Range drill. Investigators quickly realized this wasn't some random mechanical glitch or, basic pilot error. Actually, they traced this massive wave of electronic interference right back to a U.S. military base, specifically a campaign known as NavFest. Now, what is NavFest? It's a wide-area electronic warfare campaign that was taking place across southern New Mexico. They were using experimental GPS jammers hosted at the White Sands Missile Range. Basically, the military was actively testing its electronic warfare capabilities, intentionally saturating the whole region with interference just to see how systems would hold up. And here's the thing, we know for a fact that the medevac's experience wasn't just some isolated freak anomaly. Get this, at least 3 other aircraft flying in the area reported severe navigation disruptions during this exact same exercise. So that confirms the jamming wasn't an accidental glitch, it was a highly effective, wide-area test. But even more alarming, reports indicate that the jammers were turned back on just minutes before the King Air impacted the mountain. Which brings us to part 3. When navigation goes dark. Let's break down this cascading failure. To really grasp the severity of this, we have to look at what exactly happens inside the cockpit when your primary navigational tools are just abruptly stripped away. It's not just like losing a Maps app on your phone. It's the total collapse of an entire safety ecosystem. The contrast is super stark. Under normal flight conditions, crews rely on familiar satellite guidance. They have these dynamic moving maps, active alerts that scream if they get too close to terrain, and incredibly precise positional fixes. It's this amazing high-tech safety net. But under blackout conditions, that net just vanishes. The crew is forced into an immediate reliance on rarely used backup systems. In this specific case, they had to navigate visually through dark, mountainous terrain in terrible visibility. It's a terrifying instant shift from absolute precision to sudden, disorienting blindness. This sequence really perfectly outlines the catastrophic collapse of situational awareness. It's like a deadly domino effect. Step 1, the GPS signal vanishes mid-flight. Step 2, the crew was forced onto those older analog backups. But step 3 is where the system-wide failure really hits hard. Air traffic control is suddenly juggling multiple flights that are all simultaneously dealing with this exact same GPS blackout. With controllers totally overwhelmed, step 4 hits. Weather data at the destination lags, and that final safeguard just falls away. So, as a tragic result, in Step 5, the unaided crew completely fails to detect the rising mountain terrain before impact. Now, you might be thinking, didn't they know there was testing happening? Well, the preliminary report actually noted that the crew had been warned before their departure that GPS interference might be present in the area. But as we saw, that advisory proved completely insufficient once the signal actually vanished in the air. I mean, a piece of paper warning you about potential interference doesn't exactly help you fly a plane in the dark when your instruments literally go blind, right? The existing safeguards simply and totally failed to prevent this accident. Aviation analysts stress this exact point. They say, the sudden loss of GPS navigation can be deeply disorienting for modern crews who now rely on satellite guidance for maps, terrain alerts, and positional fixes. Modern aviation is entirely built around this tech. When you take away those maps, the terrain alerts, and positional fixes in an instant, even highly trained pilots can suffer a total loss of spatial awareness. All right, Section 4, a 10-fold threat increase. We need to talk about the broader danger to civil aviation. Now, this crash in New Mexico, it's the first known case of military GPS jamming contributing to a fatal civilian air crash in U.S. airspace. But data from the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association shows that this is definitely not an isolated risk. It's part of a rapidly escalating national trend. Just look at this massive, alarming spike. In 2020, there were just literally four documented GPS interference incidents, but by 2024, that number exploded to 50. That is a more than 10-fold increase in just 4 years, all because military testing is increasingly overlapping with super busy civilian flight corridors. The takeaway here is crystal clear. Pilots can no longer treat these overlaps as a rare occurrence. This insane frequency has seriously jolted regulators and safety investigators. They're now being forced to confront the harsh reality that wide-area electronic warfare testing as a frequent, ongoing, and very real hazard to domestic civil aviation. Finally, Part 5, Safe Skies or Shared Battlefields, Reevaluating Military Testing. This absolute tragedy has exposed massive, undeniable gaps in how these tests are run. It demands that we completely reevaluate the boundary between national security testing and everyday public safety. So it leaves us with one incredibly pressing question. After this crash, can the Pentagon still claim its secret jamming trials are safe? Or is U.S. weapons testing now a direct threat to anyone flying in the same sky? Really, how far can electronic warfare drills go before America's own skies become an unintended battlefield? It's a question regulators, and honestly all of us, must demand an answer to. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and stay safe out there.